My name is Stephen Middlebrook, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Marcia Hincks. And today is Tuesday, November 15, 2005, and I'm conducting this interview as part of the Connecticut Bar Foundation's James W. Cooper Fellows Oral History of Connecticut Women in the Legal Profession Project. The project is sponsored by the Connecticut Bar Foundation. So, Marcia, if you would give us your full name and your date and your place of birth, please, to start.
My full name is Marcia Lockwood Hincks. I was born Marcia Robinson Lockwood. Actually, I was born Martha Robinson Lockwood, but
Really?
My parents changed my name when I was a few weeks old. And I was born in July of 1935 in New York City.
Okay. Let's start by talking about your background. And why don't you tell us where you grew up, how you grew up, what your family life was like, and take us right through college, and then we'll talk about the profession.
My father was in surgical fellowship training at Columbia PNS when I was born. And we spent some time in New Jersey when I was very young, while he was still at Columbia. And then we moved to Philadelphia, where he joined the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. And we spent a number of years in the Philadelphia area. I should also add that I am one of three daughters. I'm the middle one, which I did not find difficult at all. I thought it was pretty good. We spent a number of years in the Philadelphia area, and then we moved to New Haven, where we spent 2 years while my father taught at Yale. And then we moved to New Jersey, where he joined the faculty at Columbia PNS. And that was pretty much the extent of the moves that we made. My mother did not work outside the home while I was growing up. She did a lot of volunteer work with various organizations, particularly during the time we were in Philadelphia. She was very involved in an organization called the China Aid Council, which subsequently joined McCarthy's list of bad organizations. But my parents' interest in that was that my father had grown up in China as the son of missionaries. My grandfather was secretary of the YMCA in Shanghai. So there was a lifelong interest, obviously, in that part of the world. My father had 2 heart attacks when he was in his early 30s. And in those days, they didn't know about anything except stop smoking, which he did. And he died in 1950 when I was 14. And that...
At age?
He was 42.
Wow.
And that obviously made a great change in our lives. Fortunately, the girls' private school where my sisters and I were students kept us on scholarship. And indeed, ultimately, my mother started working there as a director of admissions. She had no experience in that line of work, but she ended up, I think, doing a very good job for them. From there, I went to college, to Bryn Mawr. My mother and sisters and I were very blessed by the fact that after my father's death, a number of his friends, many of his friends, put together a trust fund, which was primarily for my sisters and my college education, and then for mother.
Did you have any inkling at all at that early stage about career, or were you simply looking for the best college that you could get into?
Mostly looking for the best college that I could get into. I applied just to Bryn Mawr and Vassar. I was a very good student, and so I didn't anticipate that I would have much difficulty. It really came down to where I could get the best scholarship aid, and although originally that was at Vassar, the Bryn Mawr alumni, hearing about that, scrambled around and came up with some more money, so I ended up going to Bryn Mawr.
You chose to choose between two all-female schools at the time.
Yes.
Why did you consider a co-ed alternative, or
No.
or not?
No, and the reason for that really was that the best schools available to women were the Seven Sister Women's Colleges. The Ivy League and Little Ivies at that point weren't taking women. So I think by and large, the best and the brightest ended up at one of those women's colleges. I had been at a girls' school since 7th grade, so it seemed like a sort of natural thing to do. When I arrived at Bryn Mawr, I had some notion that I would be a pre-med student and follow in my father's footsteps. It was interesting when I was growing up, and his friends or he would, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And of course, it went the full gamut from movie star to nurse. And the response to nurse always from these people was, "Why would you do that? If you want to go into medicine, you should be a doctor." So the bar was set at that level. Well, I didn't do well in freshman biology, and that was, I barely passed it. And that was basically the end of my pre-med ambitions.
Okay.
After that, I don't think I had any clear career goals during the next couple of years that I was at Bryn Mawr. I decided to major in political science, and it was through the courses that I took in that department that I became interested in law. I took a course in constitutional law, which I loved, and another...
What made you love it? Just the sheer power of the teacher, or the content, and if the content, what about the content?
A combination, Steve. The teacher was a great favorite professor of a lot of people, and
What was his name?
His name was Peter Bachrach, and he, I think himself, was a frustrated non-lawyer, somebody who kind of wished he'd gone to law school himself. But he was a very good teacher, and a very popular teacher. I liked the content of the course, because I found the issues that were under discussion to be very interesting and relevant issues. And I could picture myself really...
Arguing those cases?
Yeah.
Did they have little mock trial or moot court kind of thing?
No.
It was pretty much a lecture course.
It was lecture and discussion. I mean, most of the classes at Bryn Mawr were quite small, and so there was a lot of back and forth seminar-type discussion.
Right.
And then...
You talk about relevant issues and ones that interested you. I'm trying to think back. That would have been Brown versus the board. The civil rights issues were before the court, were they not? Or they were just after that?
When was Brown? I think Brown
54.
was... Yeah, so that was during the time I was there. There were a lot of free speech issues, the issues concerning First Amendment rights, actually a lot of Bill of Rights issues, search and seizure,
Gideon, I think, came during that
things.
period. Yeah.
And another one was the Japanese internment cases during World War II that were interesting. I ended up writing my senior honors thesis on Justice Black, who was something of a hero of mine at that time, except for those Japanese internment cases where he wasn't too good. But I went down and interviewed him.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah, and that was lots of fun. He sort of had me in the court that day. It was the first time I'd been to the Supreme Court. And
How did you set that up? You didn't just call him on the phone?
No, I wrote to him
You did?
and told him what I was doing, and he was most gracious.
Wonderful.
So it was a highlight. I also took a course in international law, which was taught by a woman lawyer by the name of Gertrude Layton. And that also was a very interesting course, although it never grabbed me quite as much as the constitutional law did.
So those are obviously highly motivating factors. Were there lawyers in any part of your family, or
No,
uncles, aunts?
no.
Probably not.
Although my family had two very close friends in New Jersey who were lawyers. One was a partner in a law firm in New York, Milbank Tweed. He was a very close family friend. And the other was Walter Gellhorn, who was on the faculty at Columbia Law School. And he and his wife had a daughter who was, for years, my best friend. And I spent a lot of time at their house. And when this idea of law school first came up, he, of course, was very encouraging. Wanted me to come to Columbia, but I didn't end up there. And I can't say that I had some real driving notion about what I would do as a lawyer, although I kind of pictured myself doing things for societal benefit. I didn't have a whole lot of concept about what pro bono was or anything of that sort.
But you must have reflected a little bit at that time, as you were going through that career choice, of the fact that at that time, women in the profession were rare, and that there might be some roadblocks, real or imagined, that could get in the way, or did that never enter your mind?
The interesting thing about going through school in a girls' school and a women's college was it really didn't occur to me that there were things I couldn't do. That was one of the wonderful things about women's education at that point. And I'll digress a little and tell you an interesting story about that. I have a cousin who's a physician. She's about my age, and she went to Smith to college. And after her sophomore year, she decided that she really ought to transfer to a larger university where there would be more science courses and more advanced science courses than were available at Smith at that time. So she transferred to the University of Wisconsin, and the next year she came back to Smith. Because although there were all these wonderful course offerings there, she was not taken seriously as a pre-med student, and so she decided she'd be better off back at Smith. And she went from there to Yale Medical School. So I did not anticipate being discriminated against as a woman. And that was also, adding to that was the fact that the Dean of Admissions at Yale Law School came down to Bryn Mawr to interview. And that was unusual, certainly. His wife was a Bryn Mawr alumna, and I think that's what started all that. But as I say, I didn't think that there would be barriers thrown up in my way.
Since you didn't think of it, it didn't apparently come up in the conversation with Dean Tate, the role of women in the law school, whether that would be in any way a problem to you or the school, or that just didn't come up, I take it?
Well, I don't remember discussing that with him, but I can say that one of the reasons that I decided to go to Yale was that it had a reputation of being a very welcoming environment to the women students. Yale had women law students for many, many years, whereas Harvard, for example, had only recently started admitting women, and the reputation was that they were badly treated by many of the faculty who resented their being there, picked on them, kind of humiliated them in class and so forth. So I never even applied there. I didn't want any part of that.
Consider any other law schools?
Yeah, I applied to Columbia and to the University of Chicago. I never went out to visit that, so I didn't really know a whole lot about it, but it had the reputation of being kind of a liberal, forward-looking law school.
Was Columbia a close second or a distant second?
I was a distant second, in spite of my connections there. I think one factor may have been my desire to put a little bit more distance between myself and New Jersey and home and all of that.
Okay.
I think if I'd gone to Columbia, I would have ended up living at home and commuting, and I'm not sure that would have been as good an experience.
Okay, so you were admitted to Yale, and now you're a young...
With scholarships and loans and all of that.
Now you're a first-year student at Yale Law School, and what were your expectations, and to what extent were they realized in those early days? It must have been very different from your Bryn Mawr experience.
Oh, it certainly was that. And my mother was very amused as all this stuff came in the summer before, that what should one expect in beer parties and galore. But there were 7 women in my class and about 150 or 60 men.
About equal representation.
Yeah, and that was a very different environment from somebody who was a product of women's education. Interestingly, almost all of the women in my class were from women's colleges.
Just to digress for a minute, what happened to them? Did they all go on to be lawyers? Did some of them just marry and not become lawyers?
And not, yeah.
Half and half? Or
Let's see. Well, one of them, and the one who was one of my very good friends, left after her first year to get married. She married a lawyer, but she never completed her legal studies. She ended up as a teacher, and I have not seen her now in years, but the others, I think, all ended up practicing law, at least for some period of time, and some for full careers. One of the 7 left after our first year, or after our second year, I guess, because her husband, who was a class ahead of us, had been drafted. And she went and sat out 2 years with him at Fort Dixon, New Jersey, which seemed like a terrible waste of anybody's time. And this guy was the editor-in-chief of the Law Review, so it was certainly not productive. But then she came back and finished with him and did end up practicing. So, yeah, I'd say
quite different experience.
It was pretty good.
Okay. But now you're at the law school, and it is a different experience because you're now in a minority in terms of gender. Do you recall any experiences that amounted to any bias or prejudice, or were you treated pretty well?
I think I was treated very well. There was one professor who liked to have his classes at Maury's, a eating, drinking club, and women were not admitted to Maury's at that time. And so he probably harbored a little resentment about the fact that there were sometimes women in his classes that made him search for another place to hold them. But I never took any courses from him. In terms of my general experience there, I loved it. I found the classes invigorating, and Yale had a mixture of both large lecture-type classes, but you always were ready to be called on.
And you found that you were called on.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And as first semester exams came up, of course, everybody was in something of a panic about, because it was sort of hard to know how you were doing,
Right.
because you went
That's right.
the whole term with
No quizzes,
no exams,
that's right.
and stuff. So that was hard. But I did very well, and I made Law Journal as a result of my first semester grades, which at that time it was entirely grade driven.
Right. There's no such thing as competing for it.
I guess there may have been a couple of slots that people could compete for if they didn't make it on grades, but primarily it was grade driven.
Who were the editors during your tour there?
Well, one of them was this guy, Bob Weinberg, who got drafted. Steve Schulman was one of the editors. And, I'm trying to think.
Was Alan Dershowitz there when you were there?
No.
Well, it doesn't matter. Okay.
I ended up never publishing anything
Oh, really?
in the Law Journal. I worked very hard during the second semester of my first year and first semester of my second year. A lot of what we did then was source checking for other people's articles. Right. But I also had the experience of having a couple of topics that I had selected to write a note about get blown, meaning that some other law journal beat us to it, and then we didn't do it. And then after I got engaged during our second year, and as the time for our marriage approached, I ended up resigning from the Law Journal because I knew I wasn't going to want to put in that amount of time the following year.
Okay, you've touched on the subject of romance and marriage. Talk to us about
Well,
how that all came about and how you met your current husband.
My husband, John, and I were in the same class, and because the classes were so small, you got to know pretty much everybody pretty fast. And Johnny and I had some good mutual friends who kept trying to put us together, but at that time I was sort of interested in
He had
somebody
a
else.
tour in the Navy before
He'd
he
been
came
in the
to law
Navy,
school.
right? So he graduated from college in '52, so he was 4 years ahead of me. And I ended up actually getting him a blind date with a very good friend of mine the spring of our first year. And they saw a fair amount of each other over the summer and early in the fall, but it just wasn't going anywhere. And so suddenly Johnny decided that he'd try and pick my brains about what might be going wrong with this relationship or not going at all. And that was sort of the end of it. We went we went out a couple of times.
Were you a totally unbiased person at that time?
No,
Maybe not.
maybe not, but it all worked out for the best. And we really had a very brief courtship. I think our first real date was the beginning of November, Yale-Dartmouth game. And we got engaged the day after Christmas.
And married?
We were married the following June.
Okay.
the end of our second year.
How did that change your life at law school? Did you say you resigned from the Journal?
Well, that was probably the biggest
yeah.
change. And then, of course,
Setting up a house was quite another.
we rented an apartment on Lake Place, which was a quick walk to the law school, and spent our third year there, and it was fine.
Okay, so now you're married and now you're thinking about a career. Did you and your husband readily agree that both of you should have careers, or was there some discussion of having a family and then perhaps tending to your career later on, or how did that all go in terms of how you worked
We
that
wanted
out?
to have a family right away. I think especially Johnny, who was then approaching 30, and also because I think we both just kind of assumed that that's what we wanted. I don't remember any back and forth argument about it. We decided that that's what we wanted to do, and our first child was born only a couple of months after we graduated. And but by that time I had indeed taken the bar exam, so I knew when the time came I'd be ready to get going.
Okay. When did that time come?
When our second child was approaching her first birthday, that's really when we decided, and Johnny kind of gave me a nudge and said, if you don't do something now, it's going to get more and more difficult. And he was right. So that's when I started looking for a job, and I knew that I wanted to work part-time.
You were living in Hartford then? Because
We were living in West
because
Hartford.
John was
We came up to Hartford right after law school, and Johnny became an associate at Robinson and Cole, where he had spent a few months working as a sort of an intern between the time he got out of the Navy and the time that he started law school. So he already had ties to the firm and knew a number of the people there.
So now you're looking for a job. What did you think your options were, being a mother and living in Hartford? What
I was somewhat interested in legal aid because I thought that since I didn't really need to support myself in this, that perhaps I should be doing something that would benefit the society at large. I didn't stir up much interest from that organization.
Really?
Well, I think because of the part-time thing.
But they had women there working, did they not?
At that time, I'm not sure. I don't know whether they did or not, Steve. I mean,
think they
there weren't really that many women lawyers around
true.
Hartford at that time. I investigated a couple of possible clerkship opportunities, but there again, the part-time thing was a problem. I had gotten to know John Filer some because he lived across the street from my brother-in-law out in Farmington, and they were very good friends.
Explain who he was.
John Filer had recently been hired by Aetna from a law firm in New Haven, and he had come up as basically the heir apparent to the general counsel's position, which was then occupied by Pat Kavanaugh. And one of John's charges in taking on this assignment clearly was to start building a bigger and better law department. And I had seen him both through this family connection, but also at various Yale Law School alumni gatherings and so forth. And he had told me along the way that he would very much like to talk with me about the possibility of working at Aetna when I was ready. And so I went to see him, and I told him that I had some reservations about the idea of working for a corporation as opposed to doing something more pro bono-like. And he made, obviously, what was a very compelling argument to me, that I could have it both ways, that if I came to work at Aetna, I would have intellectually challenging work to do, and also the opportunity to do things in the community.
And as we'll talk about a little bit later, he made good on that promise.
He
in
definitely
spades. Yeah, okay.
made good on that promise, on both promises.
Right. Let me talk about the other options and ask you whether you even consider them. You talked about legal aid and you talked about clerkship. Another option might have been a government job, a government lawyer. And at that time, as I remember, the government jobs for women lawyers did exist. Whether they existed on a part-time basis or not, I can't remember. But so that would have been another option. And of course, the other option would have been working in a law firm. Did you consider those other options at all, or were they foreclosed because of the part-time aspects?
Well, I didn't consider government at all. Perhaps because I didn't know much about it, even. Law firms, I think it was not just the part-time issue, but it was also the female gender issue. I don't think that any of the big firms in Hartford had women at that point, and
why
I
do
think
you think?
I think that was true of most cities, law firms the size of Hartford, and one of the reasons for that clearly was that those firms at that time were hiring on people whom they expected to move through the associate ranks and become partners. They didn't hire extras. At Robinson & Cole, for example, Johnny and our classmate Colin Tate were the only two associates who joined the firm that year. And I think that was generally true of the firms in Hartford as well as many other cities. Wall Street was sort of an exception. I think it surprisingly, if you were well up in your class, it was easier for a woman to get a job on Wall Street than in Hartford because they expected to have a lot of turnover. So if you got married and left 5 years down the road, that was fine.
When did that barrier get broken in the Hartford law firm community? Was there a single event, some particular person was hired, and then it all became different?
I think it was more gradual than that. And I can't remember which firms were first. I think Dayberry and Howard may have had a woman before Robinson & Cole or Shipman and Goodwin, but I honestly don't recall.
When that day came, could you have worked at Robinson & Cole, or?
Oh, I never would have
You
wanted
probably
to.
never would have, but
No.
was there a rule that said, now that we're taking
don't
women,
think-
we're not going to take the
Well,
wives of lawyers?
When Johnny first started talking to Robinson & Cole, our third year in law school, they did ask him if he was looking for one job or two. but I think there probably, at that time, would have been some real concern about married couples working in different firms in terms of confidentiality and conflicts of interest and so forth. That's something that I think has pretty much gone away, but I'm sure it would have been a
Particularly
barrier.
in large firms, it's
Yeah, yeah.
fairly easy to insulate yourself.
So
But what I'm getting at is when that barrier got broken, did you then reconsider an option that had been theretofore foreclosed to you?
no,
You did not. You were
No,
happy
because
in what you were
by
doing.
that time I was very happy where I was.
right.
And no, I never really considered leaving the firm. I mean, leaving Aetna. One time there was a little rumble of, remember Henry Armstrong?
Yes, the Travelers General
Yes.
Council.
Well, he got it into his head that maybe he'd like to push my name forward for a judicial appointment. And then he discovered that I was not a registered Republican, and he dropped that idea.
Yeah, we'll try not to get into politics too much in this,
But
in this
that
conversation.
was
Yeah.
that was the closest that anything ever came
Yeah.
to leaving.
Before we get into the early employment years at
Mm-hmm.
Aetna, or the Aetna years in general, let me digress a little bit. Talk briefly about your children. You had 4 children, and now you must have a bunch of grandchildren.
10.
Wow. Without going through all 14 of them, what became of your children? What
Okay.
are-
Well, our oldest is a daughter, and she went to Yale as a college student, where she met her now husband, who was a Swedish hockey player who had been brought along with his brother to Yale to play hockey. And he dropped hockey, actually, because he didn't like U.S. hockey. But anyway, they got married several years after they graduated, and they spent a couple of years here and then moved to Stockholm,
Okay.
where they have been ever since. And Becky now teaches.
You're being too modest. Your daughter just
I was
became
going
okay.
to tell you that,
All right.
as I already have. Last Friday, she successfully defended her doctoral dissertation and is now a PhD, and will continue to teach in Stockholm. Our second daughter has a master's degree in public health, which she also got from Yale. And she's done a variety of things. At one point, she was very involved in an organization that did a lot of work on AIDS prevention, education. And in fact, although we didn't know it at the time, the position that she held was one that was funded by Aetna. And she now lives in Amherst, Massachusetts. Her husband works for AOL and telecommutes.
Oh.
And she works as a consultant for the Center for Disease Control. She does that part-time and mostly from home, although she does some traveling. Then our older son is John, and he works for Fidelity in the marketing area.
In Massachusetts, Boston.
He's in Boston, yeah. And he, prior to that, worked for Bank Boston for a number of years, but he very much enjoys Fidelity. And our youngest son, Ben, finally gave us the lawyer in our family that we needed. He went to Yale and worked for several years as a paralegal in the Boston area, and then decided to go to law school. And he went to Northeastern Law School, which he loved, because the combination that they have of academic semesters and then work semesters suited him very well. And he went to work after law school for one of the firms that he'd worked for as a paralegal, and he's now a partner doing litigation. One of the kind of interesting connections here now is that some fair amount of the work that he does for Liberty Mutual Insurance Company, which is headed by Ted Kelly, who
An
was
old client of yours.
who was an important client
That's
of
right,
mine.
that's-
And yeah, in fact, Ben was
Yeah.
at a meeting at one point where Ted was involved, and apparently, when he found out who Ben was, started waxing eloquent about me, which I'm sure didn't hurt Ben at all. But
Good.
Anyway, that's been
Well, that's
kind of
impressive.
fun.
We won't go through the 10 grandchildren.
No, we won't.
Maybe the next interview when they're older and more established.
I will only say that the oldest one has just filed for early admission at Yale, so we'll keep
Yale
our
is a
fingers
very
crossed.
prominent place in your
Well,
family and career.
It does
interesting.
indeed.
Yeah.
It does indeed.
All right, let's talk about Aetna and your early years there. What did they have you doing? What kinds of law did you practice?
Okay.
How were your client relationships, and to what extent did you, if any, did you encounter gender issues?
First of all, I should say, because this was really, I think, a banner event, is that I was hired on a 15-hour-a-week basis. I worked 3 days a week for 5 hours. And that was really, I don't think there was anybody doing that at Aetna. The personnel department was horrified when I told them that that's what John Filer and I had agreed to. They said, we don't do that. And I said, well, I don't think Mr. Filer knows about that rule. Maybe you better call him. So
Right.
it.
Why do you suppose they didn't do that? It would make eminent sense. You consider all the people out there who could have lent some real talent to the organization, but would have had to do it on a part-time basis. Why have such a
Steve,
rule?
I'm not sure that there were all that many people who were looking for part-time jobs in
Really?
those days. I think women either worked or they didn't work. I don't think there were many people who were coming around asking to work part-time.
So they never really had to consider it.
So they probably didn't have to consider it, although they seemed to think that they wouldn't do it. So I guess they must have considered
Yeah, it
it
was
some.
halfway between we don't do that and we've never had to consider
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And therefore,
yeah.
we don't do
Yeah,
that. Yeah, okay.
yeah,
In any event, you and Mr. Filer broke that rule, if it were
Yeah.
a rule.
And I was sort of, for the first years that I was there, I would say a jack of all trades. The department was very small, and I worked on assignment for just about anybody who wanted to ask me to do something. So I can't say that I really specialized in anything in particular. I did some work in the investment area, some work in the products area, and some tax work. But it was generally quite a wide-ranging
What
thing.
about
You must have had similar experience. I mean, you joined the department, what, about 6 months after I did?
You joined when?
In December of '61.
That's almost, 3 months, I think, after it. Yeah, March, yeah. Mentoring, help, kind of rigor that you would get in a very good law firm, was that there for you, or did you pretty much have to
I would say I
work
was
on your own?
I would say I was fairly much on my own, although John gave me a lot of support, and to his great credit, so did Pat Kavanaugh. He wasn't not really the person who hired me, but he was very supportive, and he gave me work to do, and I had a very good relationship with him.
Talk about him a minute or two, because he was an unusual fellow.
He was a very unusual fellow. It used to be in Connecticut, and I think is still the case in maybe 1 or 2 states in this country, that you could, what was called, read for the law. You didn't have to go to law school, but you had to put in a certain number of years working under the supervision of other attorneys. And that's what Pat had done, and he was one of the last people in the state to do that. I don't think he even went to college.
I think you're right.
But he was something of blustering personality. I'm sure he had a temper, but I don't recall his ever losing it at me. And he was not what would be your current vision of a general counsel, but Aetna's
Senior lawyer, really.
Aetna's law department in those days was not exactly what your vision now would be of a
Group of senior
corporate-
lawyers who happened to be together in the same room.
Yeah, one big room
Right.
where they all sat at their desks. And I guess there was one guy. I think he had left before I came, but word had it that every day after lunch he'd crawl under his desk and go to sleep for a nap. Do you remember hearing that story?
I remember hearing that there was such a lawyer, and he crawled under his desk to make phone calls because he didn't want anybody else to listen to him. I'm not sure about the sleeping part, but that may have been true. Yeah.
But clearly, John's charge was to start trying to boost the level of the department, and he had hired, about 6 months, I guess, before I came, he'd hired a lawyer from Yale, and then I came along, and then you came along, and things started to change quite rapidly after that.
Yeah. Again, the Yale theme plays through all of this.
Well, it did
Yeah.
then. I'm not so sure that it
No, it
does
doesn't.
much anymore.
Doesn't it? Okay.
But as I say, I did really quite a variety of things, but I was regarded as a good writer and somebody who could clearly express to clients or other lawyers the points I was trying to get across, and that was important.
Did you ever encounter any resentment, any opposition, or any feeling by your clients that they would prefer to be dealing with a male lawyer?
For the most part, no. I didn't during those years have all that much contact with clients. Most of the work that I did
Through the lawyers,
was through other lawyers.
And the other lawyers, at least in the law department, had no problem with gender that you could recall?
Not that I can recall. Why would they if I was getting the job done for them? And also, I think probably since they knew John had hired me, they figured that they shouldn't make a fuss about it. People thought I was an oddity. There's no question about that. I sat, my desk was right in front of Pat Kavanaugh's desk with some greenery in between me and him. And then in front of me there was a little railing that went all the way around and separated the lawyers from the secretaries. But because I was smack in the middle, right behind the railing, people walking into the department very often assumed that I was sort of the head receptionist and would stop at my desk. It was not an environment that was particularly conducive to getting a lot of work done.
Were there any other women officers or
No.
or employees
No.
of rank
No.
at that time?
No.
You were,
There had at one time, as I understand it, been a woman officer, and she really was sort of an assistant corporate secretary, and her role
Yes, I
was
know.
primarily secretarial, but for convenience, she was an officer of the company so she could sign things.
Okay.
But apart from that, no.
okay, so now you have this early role as sort of a woman of all trades, and now more children come along, so
Right.
you leave again. For how long did you leave this time?
I left in the spring of '64, and I came back in the fall of '67.
Okay, quite a lengthy break.
So it was, it was 3+ years. We had 2 children during that time. But I did continue to do some work with John Filer during that period of time. He was head of a Bar Association commission that was looking at the appointment of judges, judicial selection options. And I did some work for him.
Okay, so that sort of kept you in touch
So
with
that sort of kept
not
me
only
in.
him, but other lawyers during that period?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There were a number of meetings, and we had people from outside the state who came and talked to us and so forth.
Did you and your husband have a practice of talking about issues that he was involved in that would get you talking about law, or was that sort of understood that stayed at the office?
No, we would talk about it some. We would have discussions. Our kids would say we had arguments, but
They didn't understand how lawyers work.
the dinner table was often lively. But that didn't occupy a really important part of our discussions. I mean, his field was trust and estate planning, and although it was of great interest to me, it wasn't anything that I had great insights that I could offer to him. But we were, I think, during a lot of those years, so busy just keeping up with 4 children
Right.
that kind of became
Right,
the
so
focus.
3 years go by, and now you are thinking about going back to the corporate setting. John Filer is now general counsel, is he?
Yep,
So he would obviously welcomes you back.
yep, yep.
And now you're still a part-timer. But now you're beginning to specialize, or how did that begin?
Well, when I went back, he had a particular area in mind that he wanted me to get involved with, and that was working in the life products area in support of the people who were doing that. A lot of it involved work with agents on how they could fit in certain products to meet their customers' needs. Sometimes even to the point where we would draft documents that supposedly were going to be then reviewed and revised by their clients' attorneys. But we knew as a practical matter that often those things came back executed with not a word changed, and probably because we were more on top of the legal and tax issues than most lawyers were.
Okay. So these were tax issues predominantly?
Predominantly, yes. On the customer's side, a lot of it having to do with small businesses that wanted some kind of life insurance protection for buyouts or whatever. And so I did a lot of that, and agents would call up and say, I've got this problem, and can you help, and so forth.
So you began to like tax law?
Yeah, I did.
Because
which
of the problem?
kind of a surprise. I mean, I had taken a couple of tax law courses in law school, and I had done well in them and enjoyed them. One in particular, Boris Bitker, who was the premier tax lawyer, and he was a wonderful teacher. And if you can find a federal tax course interesting, he was the one who made it. So
I remember I had the same impression, having taken them a couple of years later. But the problem-solving aspect of it, and the fact that clients found that you really could be helpful to them, I
yes,
suppose,
indeed,
had some role to play.
And then the other tax work that I got involved in along the way at the same time was that in 1959, a new method of taxing life insurance companies had been adopted by the Congress. And it went into effect 1959 or 1960, but there were a lot of uncertainties about how the law operated. It was very complicated, filled with actuarial notions, And so the first few years of filing tax returns under that statute, there were really a number of open issues that we weren't sure how they would eventually work out. And during the late 60s, surprisingly, it was the first time that some of those early tax years actually came up for audit.
Right, so there were no graybeards in this profession because the law was
No.
new and very different from any other law that
Right.
was on the books. So that was kind of fun to
It was.
be on the ground floor of that at a tender young age and know
Absolutely.
as much as people twice your age.
Although a lot of the people who eventually got really involved in this had much more actuarial background
Okay.
than I did. But a number of us worked on the issues that came out of the first audit, and you probably did. I can't.
Yes, I did.
I can't remember, but
So you had the company as a client, but you also were involved in the industry itself,
Right.
which was going through all of this, and presumably you had lots of experience working with other lawyers from other companies.
yes, and also from law firms. And eventually, I kind of dropped the product end of things and was really a full-time life company tax lawyer, although occasionally I would get involved in some of the other tax issues that we had involving other companies within the group.
You should probably explain that although Aetna now is predominantly a health company, back then it was a full multi-line company
Right.
with a substantial group life insurance practice as well as
Right.
an individual life
Right.
practice. Okay.
And I did some other things along the way. I got very involved in the early development legal issues surrounding the Civic Center, which Aetna played a major role in developing. Did a lot of work on that, which
Okay.
was
This
interesting.
may be a good time to break just for a
Good.
few minutes, and
Okay.
then we'll resume with the rest of your career, and
Great.
in particular your outside activities and your mentoring role.
We can stretch.
Okay. We'll come back to more employment experiences, but I want to talk about two other aspects of your life at that point, and one is the mentoring role that you must have taken on as one of the early people to go into the practice. And then I also want to talk about something that you mentioned earlier, and that is the opportunity that was given to you to engage in outside activities.
Okay.
Let's talk about the mentoring role first. A whole bevy of women came on after you
Right.
to Aetna, many people, to the extent which at one time they must have made up at least half of the department, maybe more. Many of these people...
I don't think ever half.
You don't think that
Steve.
ever half?
No,
Okay.
no, no.
A large portion.
A large
Seemed like
number.
half because they were so bright and engaging. So many of these people must have looked to you for experience, advice, counsel. How did that go? What did you normally handle those in a one-on-one way? Was there any formal organization that you either started or participated in that focused on how to make these difficult transitions from family raising to career? How did that all go?
Well, within Aetna, I can't say that there was any organized effort in that regard, or indeed within the law department. I mean, we didn't get together as the women lawyers in any sort of organized way. But indeed, after I came back in '67, when I came back, there was one other woman lawyer there. She was not there for long after I came back. But we started seeing more women law students and hiring more women, some of whom were married and raising families, others who were not. I suppose that with respect to the former group, those married with children, yeah, we talked about our common experiences and issues, but most of them, with a few exceptions, were fairly self-assured and pretty much knew where they were heading. There were not many who explored the part-time option, as I recall. There may have been one or two. You might remember, but I think there may have been one or two along the way who did some part-time.
Right.
But I think that the very fact that I was there and sort of visibly having an increasingly important role was a draw. I know one woman who was in the law department, is not now, but she's still at Aetna in a very senior role, and she will tell you that given her choice between two corporate law departments, she chose Aetna
Because of you.
because of me. Not just because I was there and working at Aetna, but because of what we'll get to later, some of the other things that I was doing in the community, and the fact that I also had a family.
And indeed, you became the head of the recruiting committee at one point, did you not?
Yes, I did. I was head of the recruiting committee for a couple of years while Warren Elliott was general counsel. And again, I think there was an attractiveness for women to come to Aetna because there were women in visible leadership roles there.
And you, in fact, you went to various law schools and interviewed on the campuses there.
Yep. I think also over the years, particularly after I became an officer and then after I became a vice president, there were women from outside the law department in the company who sort of looked to me as an important symbol of where they could get to. A couple of times I was asked by people outside the department to sort of spend some time with and mentor, however one might call it, women who were in their departments, not in the law department.
But did you ever participate in any formal way? Was there, you said there wasn't an organization within Aetna, but outside of the company, were there?
Well,
you mentioned
there was an organization that was formed, I would guess probably in the 70s, called the Hartford Association of Women Attorneys. And that was both a networking and...
Who founded that group? Remember?
I can't remember, Steve.
You must have been a charter member.
I was an early member, certainly. And we would meet once every couple of months for lunch, and sometimes a speaker, sometimes it would just be an informal networking opportunity. I don't know whether that organization still exists. I'm not sure that the need for it exists anymore, but certainly it was, I think, an important support group for what was still a fairly small number of people.
When you met, aside from discussing legal issues, as any legal group would, did you find that there was a focus on gender issues and shared experiences, or as time went on, did that become less of a focus?
I think at the start, there certainly was some focus on that. I think it was perhaps more of an issue at that time for the women who were in private practice. And it certainly was an opportunity for them to network and cross-refer business and things of that sort. But there were a number of corporate lawyers as well. I don't know whether one could call it a predecessor because it wasn't an organization at all, but when I first came back to Aetna in '67, through the other woman lawyer who was in the department, I became acquainted with Ethel Donahue, and Ethel Donahue was one of the first women lawyers in the state. I'm not sure that she ever practiced. She was a very wealthy woman, but she took it upon herself to find and bring together women lawyers. And she would invite anyone she could find for gatherings at her house. And I went to a couple of those. And we're talking about a handful of people at that time.
But that was more just a social occasion?
Yes, yes.
Not designed around any particular topics?
Nope, nope.
Sexual harassment became a big issue, I guess, later in the 70s and 80s. Do you recall it being an issue at all in these groups? Was it talked about? Was it the issue that never did get talked about?
I don't remember talking about it at those, but that may have predated the real focus on it. I can't believe that there weren't women in those groups who experienced a fair amount of it in their workplace. Frankly, I don't think I ever did. I once had the experience of being told I couldn't go to an agent's meeting because it just wouldn't be seemly to send a woman to deal with all those men. But that wasn't a harassment issue. That was just.
How was that resolved? Did you not go?
I didn't go. Yeah. I didn't want to make an issue.
Didn't want to go? Is there
Probably not, and I didn't want to make an issue out of it. I subsequently, in future years, I went to a number of life agent gatherings and also group representative gatherings, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. Had a good time at all of them.
Going back to Bryn Mawr, one of the reasons you thought you'd want to get into law is because you could get involved in helping people, public service, or at least that was a related issue. Now you're at Aetna, the John Filer promise holds true, and over time you take on very significant roles in the United Way, in Planned Parenthood, and Hartford Hospital, and of course, I'm sure there were others, but those were the three. Talk to us a little bit about your role in those three organizations and how you juxtapose those with your role as a working lawyer.
Some of them, well, particularly the United Way, and I think to a certain extent Hartford Hospital, I got involved with really through Aetna. The United Way, my association started with being asked by one of the other lawyers in the department to serve on the allocations committee, which is a very important piece of the work that the United Way does.
That's where the money goes.
That's where the money goes. And it's quite a time-consuming job. I was still working part-time at that point, so there was some flexibility there. I eventually became chairman of the allocations committee, and then was asked to step into the vice chairman role. I was the first woman to chair that organization.
When was this, roughly?
Yeah, it was in the mid-'80s.
And it was a 1 year, 2 year?
It was a 2 year.
2 year deal.
And when I was asked to do that, I was apprehensive about it because I did think that, I was worried that I would not carry enough clout to do some of the things that the United Way always needed to do to get companies to send loan executives and money
Right.
and all of that kind of thing. And also whether it might be regarded by other executives in the community as overstepping the boundaries of, I mean, after all, you're only a, whatever I was then, counsel. Maybe I might have been a vice president by then, thanks to you. But
Thanks to you.
anyway, I went to see John Filer to ask him what he thought of the idea, and he encouraged me to do it and was very reassuring because he said, look, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you think you don't have enough clout, come see me and we'll take care of it. I really enjoyed my association with United Way, not just because I think it's a wonderful organization, but because I met so many people through the work that I did there, and
Including the agencies that you were supporting, of course.
the agencies that we were supporting, but the people who served on the board and the various committees, and the loan executives in the campaign, and just a whole bunch of associations that I really value.
At that time, it was still considered an honor to be a loan executive or to participate, and not a distraction from the job. Later on, as I recall, there were more difficulties.
I think that's right. I think, unfortunately, it became a situation in which companies would select executives, people to be loaned because they were on their way out the door anyway, and that wasn't as good. But during the time I was working with the loaned executive group, I guess it was in connection with one of the years when I was involved in the campaign. They were a great group and fun to work with.
And through this all, you kept up your 15 hours or whatever it was.
I think somewhere along the early 70s. I think when I became an officer of the company, assistant counsel, I guess it was called then. Warren Elliott, who made that happen, despite the fact that I was working part-time and it had never happened before, did say, it would be a little better if you could get it up to 20, because then we could say you were half-time.
And you did.
And I did.
And that was 20 hours plus whatever you were able to give to the United Way, or I guess you probably didn't measure it all that precisely.
I mean, I had if I was working from 8 to 12, and I had a meeting at 10 at the United Way, I wouldn't then come back and say, well, I have to work till 2. But what really happened was that over the years, I was working more and more hours, and eventually it got to a point where I was calling it 80% of full-time, and I was working from 8 to 5.
Yeah.
And now that probably would be 80% of full-time, but it got to a point where we finally decided to just say, I'm working full-time. And I tried to look back and find out when that was, but I'm not sure. It just evolved. Certainly, by the time I became a vice president, I was working full-time.
Tell me about Planned Parenthood. You've been active in that for many, many years.
I haven't done anything for them recently at all, but no, I was asked by somebody I had gotten to know out in the community, and I'm trying to remember who it was, to join the Hartford board for Planned Parenthood. And I was very interested in the organization and the work that they did. I had actually, my third year in law school, been asked by Fowler Harper at Yale to be one of the plaintiffs in what ultimately became the Griswold case. But when I told
Right,
him
to
that I
the
was
result case being, give it
that
2 sentences.
established the woman's right to, or the right to use contraceptives.
And was a
and
foundation for Roe
esti-
versus Wade.
Yes, and it was
Yeah.
basically the foundation for the so-called right of privacy.
But there was a big reason why you thought you couldn't be a plaintiff
I
in
was
that case.
pregnant.
Right.
And when Fowler Harper called me up to his office and asked me if I would be willing to do this, I had to tell him that I thought it would not make a whole lot of sense.
And he agreed.
And he agreed.
But he gave you some other jobs. so,
And he
yeah.
agreed. But I was interested in the organization, and I knew some other people who were involved in it. And so I served on the board of the Hartford chapter and became chairman of that for several years. And also in that role served on the state board, because the Planned Parenthood has a statewide organization with local chapters that also have some governance. So that was interesting and challenging.
Did controversy surround that organization at your time, as it has later in terms
No,
of
not really.
right wings and left
Well,
wings?
there was some controversy, of course, but it was really before the abortion issue became front and center. There were still, I mean, there were certainly organizations that would not, companies and so on, that would not contribute to Planned Parenthood because they thought it was too controversial.
Talk a little bit about your Hartford Hospital role, where you came to become chairman of the board of that distinguished organization.
Yeah. Well, I became a corporator of Hartford Hospital. At that time, again, there were so few women in really visible positions in the corporate world in Hartford that people like me were sought after for reasons that were perfectly well motivated, that they organizations that were primarily run by a group of corporate executives wanted some diversity, wanted to show that there were some women who were involved. And shortly after I became a corporator of the hospital, I was asked to join the board
By
John Springer,
who was then the head of the hospital.
who was then the head of the hospital. And I think at the time, I'm trying to remember who was chairman of the board at the time I joined. It might still have been Joe Sargent or Joe Calhoun. But anyway, I agreed to do that and found it very interesting.
You were the first woman ever on the board? or-
Oh, no, I'm sure there had been
There were
some
others,
women on the
okay.
board, yeah. And then I became a member of the executive committee, which is really the governing body. The board is quite large, meets 4 or 5 times a year, but the executive committee is really where the decision-making occurs. And so I got involved in that and really enjoyed it a lot. Then I was asked, basically by Bob Clark, who was an Aetna executive, head of our property casualty division. When he became chairman, he asked if I would become vice chairman of the executive committee. And that created something of a stir at Aetna, because at that time, obviously, we were so involved in the health insurance area.
And the whole phenomenon of managed care had come about.
Along, and
which-
there was
yeah.
a real concern that there would be some conflict of interest between my role at the hospital, or indeed the role of any other relatively senior executive at any hospital.
The hospital didn't have that concern.
The hospital did not have that concern. Obviously, Bob Clark had
Right,
been
right.
involved all these years, and in fact had been a key person in structuring a malpractice program for the hospital, and done some really great things for them. Interestingly, I think it was more the lawyers who were concerned about this conflict, because I kept getting calls from people in the employee benefits division who were involved on the healthcare side,
saw it the other way.
saying, we'd love
Yeah.
to see you do this.
Can't remember the lawyers who were concerned about that.
They shall
It's an
remain
inside
nameless.
joke, yeah.
They shall remain
Okay.
nameless. But anyway, what ultimately resolved the thing was that I was going to be retiring before I assumed the role of chairman anyway.
So it all become academic.
So it
yeah,
all
yeah,
became
yeah,
academic.
all right.
And so I was chairman of the executive committee for 2 or 3 years, and then chairman of the board for 3 years after that.
Okay. Let's go back to your employment experience. You are now focused, we're now back in the late 60s, early 70s, you're now focused as a life company tax lawyer predominantly, and now you're getting some exposure not only to clients within Aetna, but to lawyers and non-lawyers outside the company because of what we mentioned earlier, the institutional issues that were coming up and the need to meet and discuss them. How did that all go? Did you begin to find that there were other women beginning to get into the circles, or were you still pretty much by yourself?
I was, in terms of those life company tax groups, on the committees I served on, meetings I went to and so forth, I often was the only woman. And that was okay. I didn't feel uncomfortable about that. I was so used to going to meetings where I was the only woman.
yeah.
I one time went to so many meetings over across the street from Aetna at the conference center that we had there, and you'd go into the room and there'd be 16 blue jackets hanging up on pegs along the wall, that I found myself thinking, I got to get myself a blue jacket so I'll fit right in here.
Did you?
No, I never did.
Okay.
But I think people enjoyed having some mix in the people. So, and then, as you know, I moved out of the tax area and assumed a role more on the insurance side of things, which, at least in the case of the life and group areas, was a very easy adjustment to make, because I knew all the clients and I knew all the products, having worked on them from a tax standpoint. So it was quite a natural thing to do. The property casualty side I didn't know as much about, but we had a bunch of people who did, so that was...
And you became the manager of some 20, 30 lawyers that were working on insurance
30.
issues.
Yeah.
Which was a first for you. You hadn't really been in a managerial role.
That's right. Although I'd had,
Younger tax lawyers.
within the
Yeah,
tax
right.
section, I'd had some management responsibilities.
How did you find that, the management role versus the legal role?
I liked it. I think you always feel a little mixed about that, because you're giving up something in terms of your own work product.
Right.
You really need to be working to get the best out of other people as opposed to doing it yourself. And so there's a mix there.
Right.
But I felt as if I was accomplishing something with the people that I was working with, and that I was helping to make Aetna's law department a better law department, and that was important to me.
And again, coming back to the gender issue, you were now managing a number of male lawyers as well as a few female lawyers. Did you see any tension there at all? Of course, by that time, everybody knew who you were and had the respect for you. But now you're sort of working with them in another capacity, sort of like a boss, as opposed to a colleague. Did that, you would call any tensions or any?
Oh, yeah.
You did?
Oh, yeah. A couple, particularly, I think, with the senior people, because this was a new role
Right.
that was created.
And a number of these people were older than you.
And some of them were older, and whereas they had been reporting directly to you as general counsel before that, now I was sort of in the middle there, and so that had its tensions. I also brought in some other people from other parts of the department to take on important responsibilities, and that created some tensions. But they worked themselves out along the way.
Did you find you could have open discussions with these people, particularly the older males, about have an honest discussion of those tensions, or did you find it was easier to work around them, and given the fact that some of these people are pretty set in their ways?
I would say more the latter, although I do remember having some discussions about that. But for the most part, well, in a couple of cases, the problems just went away.
Because they went away.
Because they went away in the normal course of things.
Right.
And in other cases, I think we worked out working relationships that worked fine. I mean, I knew people respected me, so and I think people liked me, so that made it easier.
Then if you had been brought in from the outside as a new face in town, that probably was easier. When did you retire, and what prompted the retirement decision?
I retired in December of '93, and that was prompted really entirely by Johnny's decision to retire, which he had made, at least a year before that, and he retired in June of '93, but he'd been sort of
So you
gradually
were, what,
phasing
58 at the time, 59, somewhere around there?
I was 58.
Right.
Yeah, and I just felt that once he had retired, I would like to do that too, and so that we'd be able to
Did you
do
phase
things
out
together.
slowly, or did you just?
No, I didn't really. I could have.
Yeah.
Zoe Baird, who was then general counsel, urged me to consider doing some consulting or part-time work. And I think I was also, the last year that I was in the department, I spent part of my time working as an assistant to Gary Beninoff, who was head of our, at that time, international and also annuity businesses. And he was a former member of the law department. And he urged me to stay on and work for him. But I really felt that I had been so engrossed in a full-time role and an important one, and I really didn't think I wanted to just have a half role or a quarter role or whatever.
Even though that's where you started.
Even though that's the way I started.
Okay.
But in a very different situation.
And so that would have been, what year did you say that was then?
End of '93.
End of '93. So you've had 12 years of retirement. Tell us about how you spend your days in a retirement mode.
Sometimes I wonder myself, but well, I've continued to be involved in a number of organizations around town. I joined the board of Hartford College for Women and became chairman of that.
Is there anything that you did not become chairman of, other than that itself?
Well, let's see.
Which probably would have happened if you'd stayed a little longer.
We'll see. Actually, most of the boards that I sat on, I did become chairman of. I was involved in the junior league for a number of years, and I never chaired that, although I was asked to. Mm-hmm. But that would have been too much of a conflict with my work. Hartford Hospital continued to occupy a lot of time. I've been involved with some things through church, and then there are 4 children and children-in-law, and now 10 grandchildren, and
you're probably a couple of years away from great-grandmotherhood.
Oh, I hope not. Our oldest grandchild is 18. I think we've got a few.
I don't think you can become a matriarch until you're a great-grandmother.
I think we'll wait on that. But Johnny and I do some traveling, which we enjoy, not a whole lot, partly because our roles here kind of have kept us busy. I'm also on the board, and have been for a number of years, of Connecticut Water Company. And I get paid for that, which is very nice. And I'm now chairman of the audit committee for that company, and that is, in recent years, time-consuming because of a number of changes that have occurred in corporate governance issues. So
you mentioned everything except golf. Didn't you take up golf?
I did take up golf.
And your husband plays golf.
Yes, he plays a lot more than I do, but it is something that we can enjoy doing together. I've also, in the last couple of years, been playing bridge, which is fun. I did that in college and law school, but hadn't since until 2 or 3 years ago.
Good.
And that's fun. And we still live in a big house and have plenty of gardening. We have a place in Maine that we spend time in the summer.
You live on Sycamore Street in West Hartford, which is right near the border of Hartford.
Yep, 1 block in.
Okay, let's finish by asking you to reflect a little bit, to the extent you haven't already, on your whole career and experiences as a lawyer and as a woman pursuing a major professional career. Did your life as a lawyer meet your earlier expectations? It certainly sounds like it did, but you had high expectations, as many people do when they go to college, about what the law would offer you. But did it generally meet your expectations?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know at what point my expectations changed some, because certainly when I first started working, and for a number of years, I really thought of it as, I'm very lucky to have this very interesting part-time job. I don't see it as something where there's a whole big career ahead of me. And that really changed when it was made clear that I could, in fact, advance on a part-time basis. I feel very blessed to have had the opportunities that I had.
You did make one interesting choice that is a little different from the way you saw life in the law at Bryn Mawr. There you saw, as a lawyer, you could be doing some things qua lawyer in the community. You chose to be very active in the community, but not in the field of law. How conscious a choice was that, or how much was it just a product of everybody wanting you to do everything and seeing needs that went far beyond where you thought the law might take you, say, in legal aid?
I think a combination, Steve. I never did participate in any of the pro bono, strictly speaking, legal programs that Aetna lawyers did participate in, and sometimes I regretted that. On the other hand, I didn't feel particularly qualified by virtue of some of the things that I did to do that. I mean, I wasn't really prepared to go to housing court, and partly that's an educational kind of thing.
I once recall a lawyer by the name of Marvin Frankel saying the thing that frightened him the most was a corporate lawyer working in a storefront legal office on Saturday mornings.
There's a wonderful piece that I have a copy of somewhere that was written years and years and years ago by our friend Boris Bicker, who taught me tax law at Yale. And it's about a group of tax lawyers in a Wall Street firm who decide that they've got to do something on a pro bono basis, and they get all involved in starting laundries in low-income housing developments and selling tax credits, and it goes on and on. It's hilarious. But given my background as a tax lawyer, that's probably about the only thing that I would have felt qualified to do.
If you look back, would you have done anything differently at all in your lifespan, in your legal lifespan?
No, and that sounds very self-satisfied, but as I say, I think all the way along the line I had the right opportunities at the right time, and I'm not at all convinced that I could do that now. I see the pressures and the pace of legal practice, both on an in-house and in firms, as being much more difficult to combine with any kind of a home child rearing.
It's a nice segue into my Maureen Dowd question, which we talked about. Maureen Dowd has just written a book called Are Men Necessary? And in it, she apparently argues, I haven't read it, I've read reviews, apparently argues forcefully that the more successful a woman is in a career, the less likely it is that she will be able to make a marriage, let alone have a family, or at least have the kind of relationship that she wants, because somehow that's anathema to the kind of men that those type of women would otherwise want to be associated with. Do you think that's true? It's not necessarily a unique point that she makes. Others have made it, but do you think that that's true more nowadays than it was when you were?
Well, I got to say, I think that my husband, Johnny, was a real pioneer. I think back then, and it may be true today, I mean, certainly Maureen Dowd points to statistics that suggest it is, that it was threatening to be a man married to a career-oriented, successfully so, woman. I mean, I think he was brave to take that on.
Although by the time you went that route, you were well grounded in the marriage and the family. You had made that earlier choice.
Well, except that I had made the choice to go to law school, and I had successfully completed that, and with every intention of using it along the line. I got better grades than he did in law school.
I wasn't going to bring that up,
but well,
it's true,
I mean, it's true. And it doesn't say anything about our talents as lawyers. It does.
Okay.
But I know she points to a lot of good hard data that support her
So you think there is some truth?
I think there is something still there. I also think that regardless of that issue, whether men look for different kinds of women, to raise a family and have the kind of very wonderful family and home life that I had and still have would be much more difficult now. I mean, I felt that by the time I left Aetna. It was not the same pace at all of the Aetna that I entered. And I'm not sure, there always will be people who can do it, and who will pull it off successfully, but I think it's a lot more difficult.
Okay. Last question. If you were in charge of some major portion of the bar here in the state and could do whatever you wanted to do, what changes, if any, would you advocate in the practice of law here in Connecticut that would make the practice more attractive to women? Is there anything that you think you could do?
I think one thing, one would certainly want to encourage more firms to allow for part-time partnership tracks, and some of them do now. There are several examples, I think, of that. But I guess lighten up a bit. I mean, I think the grind of higher and higher bars for billable hours for young lawyers are creating some real disincentives for people to go into the profession, and particularly
males and females.
females. Yeah, I mean, I can see the pressures in our son's practice, and it's true generally of particularly big city firms. So I don't know where all that's headed, but sooner or later it's got to
Somebody's got to take some kind of a leadership role and show that you can still have fun and practice the profession. That's all the questions I have. Is there anything else that you'd want to add that should have been asked but wasn't?
Not that I can think of, Steve.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.